Okay, so welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining today's session on employee conflict and workplace investigations in Ontario. My name is Victoria Stone, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. So this is a topic that comes up for almost every organization at some point, and often at the most inconvenient times. So today we'll focus on how to recognize different types of conflict when an investigation is legally required and how to handle investigations in a way that's fair, defensible, and practical. This session is designed for HR professionals, managers, and leaders, not lawyers, so we'll keep it practical and grounded in real workplace situations with language you all can understand. A few housekeeping items. As you all know, each situation is unique and advice changes in each scenario. And due to this, the Q&A function has been disabled for this webinar. But at the end of our presentation, we'll go over how to have your burning questions answered with specific advice to your circumstance. Also, don't worry if you have to step out for a moment to take that urgent call or top off your coffee. A recording of this webinar will be distributed to all participants following the event. And with that, let's get started. So we're excited to hear from our two expert speakers today. And firstly, I'd like to introduce Jordan Traynor. With 4 years of experience in human resources, Jordan has supported organizations across Canada in maintaining compliance and fostering a strong workplace culture. Her experience encompasses multiple governments, I'm tripping over my words today. Bear with me. So her experience encompasses municipal governments, unionized workplace, and both private and public sector organizations, where she has managed a broad range of HR functions in both in-house roles and outsourced settings. Jordan holds a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology and a postgraduate certificate in Human Resource Management, and she has successfully completed the CHRL designation exams. Passionate about aligning people and strategy with organizational goals, she brings a balanced approach that combines compliance and genuine care for people to every organization she works with. Secondly, I'd like to introduce Manaz Singh. Manaz is an HR manager with 4 years of progressive experience supporting diverse industries. She brings both strategic insight and hands-on experience in employee relations, workforce planning, and operational HR, with a strong focus on aligning people's strategy with business goals. With a professional foundation in healthcare and client-focused environments, Manaz understands how to balance operational demands with meaningful employee experience. She is passionate about building inclusive workplaces, strengthening leadership capability, and fostering cultures where people feel engaged, supported, and empowered to perform at their best. Known for her practical, people-first approach and results-driven mindset, Manaz combines energy with execution to help organize, grow, adapt, and thrive. So before we dive in greater detail, let's discuss what we're aiming to accomplish by the end of today's webinar. By the end of the webinar, you should be able to recognize common sources of employee conflict, understand when Ontario law requires an investigation to be completed, and apply core investigation principles such as remaining impartial, acting promptly, and ensuring fairness. Just as importantly, you'll walk away knowing what not to do because many legal problems arise from good intentions but poor processes. So with that, over to you, Manaz.
Thanks, Victoria. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Just at a high level today, here's how we're going to be spending our next hour together. We'll start with a quick discussion of what employee conflict might look like in the workplace. Then we'll review the Ontario legal framework. We'll talk about when investigations are required versus when other tools may be more appropriate. Lastly, the majority of our time will be spent walking through the investigation process. We'll show you 4 simple steps followed by key risks, common mistakes, and practical takeaways. The progression from understanding conflict to the law to the execution matters. Many organizations jump straight to interviewing without clarifying the legal triggers or the scope. That is where mistakes begin. So when we talk about employee conflict, we're not just talking about shouting matches in the office or formal complaints. Conflict can show up as tension, avoidance, complaints about fairness, or repeated interpersonal issues. Some conflict is relatively low and can be managed through good leadership. Other situations, such as allegations of misconduct or potential legal risk require a more structured approach. A key theme you will notice today is this. Not all conflict requires an investigation, but all conflict requires a response. Doing nothing is rarely defensible. Before we get into some of the more details of this webinar, we're curious to hear what you think the most common causes of employee conflict in the workplace are. Momentarily, you'll see a poll pop up on your screen. If you could please take a moment to select what employee conflict you have experienced the most in your workplace out of the options listed on your screen. This could be past or present.
That's great, guys. I'm seeing that come in now slowly. So we'll just give you a minute or so to respond, and then we'll move on. Yeah, so it looks like right now we're sitting around 55% of you are saying communication breakdowns are your most common causes, followed by interpersonal disputes, and then performance-related or workplace issues, and then ending off with the allegations of misconduct. So those will be shared as well in the end. You'll be able to see that. And back to you, Minaz.
Thanks, Victoria. So when we're talking about common workplace conflict triggers, some of the most common triggers include personality differences, a lack of trust, unclear expectations, poor communication, and workplace or workload stress. We also see conflict arise during periods of change. This could be new leadership, a restructuring, or even just an increase in workload. By understanding the root cause, we are able to determine whether the situation needs coaching, mediation, or a formal investigation. Now, I'm sure many of you watching today have experienced employee conflict in your workplace. Although this topic could be a much longer training session, we wanted to give you some preventative measures that you can think about to help minimize the amount of employee conflict at your workplace. These may include having written policies, clearly outlining expectations that are given to employees, whether it's during orientation or whether it's reviewed throughout their career with refresher trainings. A focus on building a culture of respect, communication, and teamwork where leaders also model what this looks like. Having team building days that benefit employees by fostering stronger interpersonal connections. Training and development for not only the employees, but also the leaders. Help them strengthen and expand on their job and people skills. Overall, preventive measures focus on designing an environment so conflicts are less likely to start or escalate in the first place. Overall, workplace issues fall into three distinct categories: conflict, complaints, and allegations. Each of these requires a different response. Knowing the difference between conflict, complaints, and allegations is key to handling workplace issues effectively. Conflict is often mutual and ongoing. Examples of this could be miscommunication or clashing personalities. A complaint is a formal expression of concern. For example, excessive workload or inadequate training. An allegation is a claim that someone violated a policy or the law. For example, this could be a harassment, discrimination, or safety allegation. This distinction guides our actions. Conflicts often call for leadership intervention. Complaints often require open dialogue, but allegations often trigger legal obligations to investigate, and this is regardless of how management views the situation. Properly identifying whether an issue is a conflict, a complaint, or an allegation ensures the right response strategy and minimizes legal risks. When conflict and allegations are mishandled, the consequences can be significant. We see human rights complaints, Ministry of Labor involvement, wrongful dismissal lawsuits, and lasting damage to workplace culture. Even when an employer ultimately wins, the cost in time, money, and overall morale can be substantial. A fair and organized process is often the best risk management tool. Courts and tribunals often scrutinize the process more than the outcome. A flawed process can invalidate even a reasonable decision. I'll now pass it off to Jordan, who will walk us through some key legislation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Menez, for walking us through some common causes of employee conflict, ways to prevent these conflicts from arising, and how employers can determine whether a situation is best classified as a conflict, a complaint, or an allegation. So now we're going to look at the main laws that affect how workplace investigations must be handled. In Ontario, workplace investigations are guided by several overlapping legal frameworks that set out what employers must do when concerns are raised. Now, like we said, you don't need to be a legal expert, but you do need to understand how these laws shape your responsibilities as an employer. So key laws that relate to investigations include the Occupational Health and Safety Act, also known as OSHA. This law requires employers to address workplace violence and harassment, including having policies, programs, and a process to investigate these complaints. The Ontario Human Rights Code is the law that prohibits discrimination and harassment based on protected grounds, such as race, sex, disability, and requires the employer to respond promptly and effectively to related complaints. The Employment Standards Act, also known as the ESA, and common law duties create obligations around fair treatment, proper documentation, and making reasonable, evidence-based decisions. Common law principles also support ideas like procedural fairness in how you conduct and conclude investigations. Like we said, you're not expected to interpret the law like a lawyer, but you are expected to run investigations in a way that is timely, fair, thorough, and consistent with all legal requirements. Employers' responsibility under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So the Occupational Health and Safety Act, also known as OSHA, sets legal requirements for Ontario employers to create and maintain a safe, respectable workplace. The obligations are not optional, and they are mandatory and enforceable by law. There is a focus on policy development and communication. Employers must develop, implement, and post workplace violence and harassment policies that clearly explain how the organization prevents, reports, and responds to these issues. These policies should be easily accessible to all employees and regularly reviewed to ensure they remain up to date. There are also training requirements, so all workers, supervisors, and managers must receive training on the organization's policies and procedures. Training ensures that everyone understands concepts such as what constitutes workplace violence and harassment, how to report concerns and incidents, and what to expect when a report is actually made. As an employer, you do have a duty to investigate all incidents or complaints of workplace violence and harassment in a timely and fair manner, regardless of how serious or minor the situation may appear. Handling a complaint informally or ignoring it completely because it seems inconvenient is not permitted under the Act. There are 4 main investigation standards that must be met under OSHA. The first being prompt. They must be completed as quickly as reasonably possible, ideally within 90 days or less. They must be objective. The investigator must be neutral, not involved in the incident or the complaint. They must also be thorough. All evidence, interviews, and documentation must be carefully gathered and reviewed. And of course, they must be documented. Every step, the findings, the conclusions, and corrective actions should all be clearly recorded. After the investigation, employers must provide written results to the parties involved, including details of any corrective actions taken or planned to be taken. This transparency helps ensure accountability and closure throughout the investigation. Failing to conduct or properly document an investigation and failing to communicate the results after an investigation can lead to orders, fines, and other penalties under the Ministry of Labour. So while OSHA focuses on workplace violence and harassment from a health and safety perspective, the Ontario Human Rights Code adds an extra layer of obligation, especially when harassment or conflicts involve discrimination that is tied to a protected ground. So I'm sure many of you know, but protected grounds can include, but not limited to, sex, race, disability, age, religion, sexual orientation, or gender identity. When a complaint touches on any of these areas, the employer has a legal duty to take the matter seriously, investigate thoroughly, and take appropriate action to address it. Even if the harassing behavior was not intentional, ignoring, dismissing, or minimizing such complaints can itself be seen as discrimination under the Ontario Human Rights Code. It sends a message that the organization is not protecting employees equitably, which can expose the employer to legal risk. Inaction can also be viewed as a failure to meet the employer's duty to act. This means once an employer becomes aware, or should reasonably be aware, of a potential discrimination or harassment involving protected grounds, a prompt, fair, and sensitive approach is required. Ultimately, compliance with the Ontario Human Rights Code isn't just about avoiding liability, it's about creating a workplace that is respectful, inclusive, and responsive to the diverse needs of all employees. So I know that we mentioned earlier that investigations may not always be required. So I'm sure you're asking yourself, when do I actually need to complete an investigation? Generally, investigations are required when there are allegations of harassment, discrimination, serious misconduct, violence, or safety concerns. Investigations under the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the Ontario Human Rights Code must begin immediately upon becoming aware of potential issues, ensuring timely protection for all workers. A common mistake in workplace investigations is relying on those gut feelings, such as saying, it's not that serious, or they definitely didn't mean it like that. Comments like these can downplay legitimate concerns and result in significant mistakes in judgment. These statements undermine legal duties under OSHA and the Ontario Human Rights Code, increasing your risk as employers. So even if you believe a complaint is minor, always start with a quick initial review to check if it might violate the Occupational Health and Safety Act, or your own work policies, or the Ontario Human Rights Code. This simple step helps you confirm the facts, assess the real risks, and decide on the next steps and actions you will take clearly and confidently. So it's important to recognize that not all workplace problems warrant a full investigation. In many cases, early intervention, clear communication, or informal resolution strategies are more appropriate and more efficient. For example, minor interpersonal disputes performance management concerns, or one-off misunderstandings may be better addressed through coaching or mediation or clear management direction. I'll give a quick example to put this into practice. Imagine you're a manager and you forget to credit a colleague's work on a project. The employee might be upset, they might raise their concern with you, but in most cases, this situation can be handled with quick coaching or a session with the manager to clear up any oversight, rather than jumping into that full-blown investigation. It's often just a simple misunderstanding that doesn't require a full investigation. The key is to assess the issue carefully by considering if there was a policy breach, Ontario or Human Rights Code violation, Ontario Human Rights Code or OSHA violation, and then document why a formal investigation was or was not required. Ensuring you include as much information as possible in your documentation to outline why you handled the situation the way that you did. That way, if your decision is ever challenged later, your documentation becomes your evidence. I will now pass it back to Menez to walk us through some potential penalties and key investigation principles to be mindful of when completing a workplace investigation.
Thanks, Jordan. So we wanted to include a few examples to reiterate the importance of investigations and following a proper procedure for each investigation. As an employer, you can be penalized if you fail to comply with a fair investigation process. The penalty in SE versus 2474489 Ontario Inc. directly relates to the employer's failure to properly investigate a sexual harassment complaint, which is a fundamental duty under the Ontario Human Rights Code. Why was the penalty imposed? The restaurant owner in this case did not conduct an investigation after the employee reported ongoing sexual harassment by her manager. Instead of addressing the allegations, the owner suggested a transfer that would have left the employee temporarily unemployed and essentially penalizing her for reporting the issue to him. Because no proper investigation occurred, the harassment continued and the workplace environment became poisoned, toxic, and unsafe. How does this relate to investigations under the Human Rights Code? Well, under the Ontario Human Rights Code, employers have a legal obligation to respond promptly, seriously, and effectively to harassment or discrimination complaints. The duty to investigate is independent, meaning an employer can be found liable even if the harassment itself isn't ultimately proven. As long as they have failed to take reasonable investigative steps, they will be held responsible. By ignoring the complaint and failing to investigate, the employer allowed the misconduct to persist, breaching their duty to provide a harassment-free workplace. The penalty's purpose and message in this case: there was a $35,000 award plus additional damages to compensate the employee for the harm caused by both the harassment and the employer's inaction, which included lost income and injury to dignity. This sends a clear signal. The signal is employers must treat all complaints seriously. They must follow proper investigation procedures, and they must take corrective action if necessary. This case reinforces that failure to investigate equals an independent breach of the code, attracting significant legal and financial consequences. In short, this decision highlights that the investigation process itself is part of an employer's human rights obligations. Not investigating is, by law, a violation on its own. Another example is the situation between Bidwai versus the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan Board. The employer did investigate the harassment and discrimination complaint in this case, but they did not tell the complainant what the investigation found or what the corrective steps that would be taken. This lack of follow-up left the complainant uncertain, undermined confidence in the employer's process. The tribunal ruled that failing to communicate results amounts to an incomplete and unreasonable investigation under the code. You might be wondering how this relates to investigations under the Human Rights Code. Well, under the code, the duty to investigate includes not just gathering evidence, but also closing the loop by informing the complainant of the outcome of the investigation, any actions taken to address the issue, and how to prevent recurrence. Transparency is essential to show that the employer took the complaint seriously and in good faith. Without communication, even a well-run investigation can be seen as procedurally deficient and a breach of the code. The penalty's purpose and message in this case, damages were awarded to compensate for injury to dignity, to feelings, and for confidence in the workplace. The tribunal emphasized that communication failures erode trust and can worsen an already toxic and poisoned work environment. This sets a precedent that completing an investigation includes communicating its results, and a failure to do so creates liability, even if the investigation itself was otherwise sound. A key takeaway here is that employers must ensure investigations are both thorough and transparent. The process isn't complete or legally compliant until the complainant is informed of the outcome and the organization's response. So regardless of who conducts the investigation, certain principles always apply. Investigations must be timely, they must be impartial, and they must be thorough. They must respect confidentiality to the extent possible, and they must follow procedural fairness. Documentation is a critical component when we look at investigations. It not only proves due diligence, but it also demonstrates that the employer acted promptly, impartially, and thoroughly. All of which are key components if the Ministry of Labor reviews the case or if you are ever questioned by the tribunal. Procedural fairness means that both parties have an opportunity to respond to the allegations. So you've decided that there is a need for an investigation based on the allegation that was presented to you. What next? We wanted to give you 4 practical steps that you can remember when conducting a workplace investigation. These 4 steps are designed to ensure the investigation process is fair, it is structured, and it focuses on fact-finding and documentation. Following a structure prevents reactive decision-making. We will discuss the 4 steps of an investigation in greater detail in the slides to come. But at a glance, the 4 steps are intake, gather, analyze, and conclude. Any investigation process begins with intake. It is at this stage that the importance of documentation begins. Once a concern is brought to your attention, it is important to take detailed notes and to ensure either you write down exactly what you witnessed or ensure the individual reporting submits a written statement. Either way, it's crucial to capture the facts in a timely manner and in as much detail as possible. Once a concern has been brought forward, assess the seriousness, identify any legal triggers, and determine the scope of the investigation. Ensure the complainant feels comfortable to disclose any information they may have. Ensure that they understand this matter is confidential to the extent that is possible. The goal in this stage is to acknowledge promptly and privately. Choose private locations for these discussions, as sensitive information may be shared. At this stage, employers may also need to implement interim measures such as scheduling changes or temporary reporting adjustments without assuming wrongdoing. Intake is the first step, but it is also the planning stage, which sets the tone for the investigation to follow. First and foremost, it is important to ensure the individual is safe. Remember, your role at this stage is to document the facts. It's not to decide who is right or wrong or what is true or not. It is crucial to remain neutral. Actively listen and document details as facts and not as assumptions. Gather core information. For example, the 5 W's and H, the who, the what, the where, the when, the why, and the how, if possible. You can always conduct another interview in greater detail if needed. Let the individual speak freely. Remind them that they're free to disclose what they feel comfortable with, and the more details they can provide, the better. Gauge the severity. Ask open questions to clarify if it's informal, for example, a workload clash, or if it's harassment and bullying, which could trigger a formal investigation. Now that the situation has been brought to your attention, it is time to create a plan. And that starts with choosing the right investigator. Choosing a right investigator is critical. Internal HR may be appropriate for lower risk matters, but external investigators are often necessary when senior leadership is involved, when objectivity is a concern, or even when legal risk is high. In some cases, the Ministry of Labour may require external investigators as well. Remember, perception matters. Employees must believe that the process is fair. So once an investigator has been chosen, it is time for them to begin fact-finding. The gathering stage of a workplace investigation involves systematically collecting facts, evidence, and statements to build an objective picture of the incident without jumping to conclusions. All good investigations are planned and not improvised. This includes identifying relevant policies, determining who needs to be interviewed, preparing questions, and setting realistic timelines. Clear scope helps prevent investigations from becoming unfocused or unnecessarily prolonged. Open-ended questions, what are they? Open-ended questions are questions that encourage detailed responses during workplace investigations. They help uncover facts without leading on witnesses. They promote thoroughness and they reduce bias by allowing interviewees to share freely. Some examples may include, what exactly happened? And can you walk me through it step by step? Can you expand on that? Who was involved? What did each person say or do? Can you recall what led up to that incident? What did you observe? Who else was present? And ending off with, is there anything else I should know that hasn't been covered? Evidence in an investigation is any information, material, or data that helps prove or disprove facts that are relevant to the case, such as allegations, events, or behaviors. Investigations rely on a mix of these categories, some of which could include testimonials. They could include documentary, digital evidence, physical, or circumstantial evidence. All evidence should be relevant and reliable. Testimonial is the most common, but ideally should be paired with another form, such as documentary or digital, to increase its strength. Interviews are the core of most investigations. Typically, the complainant is interviewed first, then the respondent, and then any witnesses. A reminder that questions during an interview should be open-ended and neutral. The goal is to gather factual information and not to prove a theory. Capture the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and the how in your notes. This includes participants, times, sequence of events, actions taken, and key statements. Avoid assumptions. Capture the facts as they are disclosed. Do not share any unnecessary information. Do not offer your opinions. Do not take sides. Strictly take notes and collect as much information as possible. I'll pass it back to Jordan to walk everyone through the last two steps.
Thanks, Menez. So step 3 is all about analyzing and making sense of the evidence. Once you have all your interviews, they've all been completed, and all the evidence has been collected, it's now time to move to step 3, which we classified as analyze. This is where you bring everything together, your notes, your interview statements, your documents, and any other materials you may have gathered thus far, to make sense of the evidence and what actually shows in the evidence. Start by organizing your information in a clear and manageable way. Review your notes, witness statements, emails, and all other records side by side. The goal here is to understand how all the pieces fit together to create a consistent or inconsistent story. Look for patterns and contradictions. Ask yourself, do timelines line up across statements? Do people describe locations or events in similar ways? And are there any differences in what individuals recall? And if so, why might that be? Next, evaluate what is supported and unsupported by the evidence. Clearly link each findings to specific sources, such as interview quotes, documents, or actual physical evidence. If you determine that one version of events is more credible than another, explain why. Transparency in your reasoning strengthens the fairness and defensibility of your conclusions. This is your critical thinking stage of your investigation. Your goal here isn't simply just to summarize, it's to connect all the pieces of information and reach logical, fact-driven conclusions. Finally, focus on what is actually said and shown during the investigation. Avoid making assumptions or relying on filling the gaps by personal impressions. Rely on the evidence, not your intuition. Objectivity here ensures that your analysis stands up to scrutiny and reflects fair, unbiased process. So once you've gathered all your evidence and notes, it's important that the next step is to carefully analyze what you've collected. Analyze everything you've collected at this stage. This stage connects the pieces of information into a clear, logical picture of what actually occurred. Perfect. To do this effectively, keep in mind a few things. Focus on what matters the most. Focus on the evidence that is relevant and the allegations to ensure it is reliable, meaning it comes from credible sources or it can be verified. As you form your conclusions, keep your reasoning clear and traceable so that anyone reviewing your work can understand how you reached each decision. Create a master timeline. Organize what happened by the events and connect them. Start by identifying and confirming established facts, then clearly mark any details that are still uncertain. Visual timelines often help here, and inconsistencies or patterns might become more obvious rather than keeping them separate. Use numbers where possible. Quantifying evidence helps demonstrate patterns and strengthens conclusions. For example, you might note that 4 out of 5 witnesses describe the same event at the same time, at the same place. That adds credibility to that specific detail. Identify information gaps. Ask yourself, is this evidence sufficient? to make a fair and defensible conclusion. If not, consider next steps, such as interviewing additional witnesses, reviewing new documents, or conducting follow-up interviews to clarify any unclear points. Effective analysis requires both critical thinking, structured organization, and by carefully evaluating what you know and what you still need to know. That way you can ensure your findings are accurate, balanced, and supported by clear, logical reasoning. So in workplace investigations, relying on a balance of probability standard is what they go by, meaning you determine if the alleged incidents or policy breaches are more likely than not to have occurred, based on the weight of available evidence. However, this is not a criminal standard. This approach differs fundamentally from criminal standards, as the central focus is evaluating whether workplace policies or key employment laws like OSHA or the Ontario Human Rights Code were violated, drawing directly from evidence gathered. When you are completing credibility assessments, provide clear, reasoned explanations to your judgments. For example, were the comments substantiated, meaning that they're likely true? Were they unsubstantiated, meaning that they're not supported? Or were they inconclusive, meaning it's pretty evenly balanced? And why? Why did you choose that answer? This ties your full investigation together, from the initial intake to gather to the analysis and concluding it into a defensible report. That leads us into the final step of the 4-step investigation process, which is to conclude the investigation with a documented report of the entire process and any steps you plan to action. This report should be structured and documented in a way that outlines the entire investigation from start to finish. If you are not the decision maker, this report will be used to make the decisions and execute the plan that is identified in that report. Keep record of everything related to the investigation in a secure location. That way, you can include interview notes, witness statements, confidentiality statements, evidence, and the final report if ever asked. So now we'll talk about actually writing the investigation report and the importance of a clear and complete investigation report. The investigation report is more than just a summary. It's an official record of the process and the outcome. It demonstrates that the investigation was handled thoroughly, fairly, and in line with organizational and legal requirements. A strong report typically includes key information such as dates, times, locations, a description of the actual allegation, and a clear definition of the investigation scope. It also includes an overview of your methods, who was interviewed, what documents or evidence were reviewed, and how the information was actually analyzed. It provides findings and rationale, showing how you reached each conclusion and how the evidence supports those findings. When outlining outcomes, always connect actions directly to evidence. For example, if you documented evidence that shows a policy breach, the corrective action might be policy retraining, it might be re-signing of the policy, it might be coaching. There's many options to explore. The clear link between the evidence and the action strengthens the credibility and defensibility of the entire process. So as you complete an investigation, the final report becomes one of the most important parts of the investigation. It brings together all the evidence, findings, and conclusions in a clear, organized way. A well-written report not only documents what happened, but also supports transparency and helps decision makers make an informed next steps. Make sure that you take your time and do it right. Writing a comprehensive report often takes longer than expected. Set aside dedicated time to review your notes, verify key facts, and ensure that your conclusions are supported by the evidence. Rushing through this stage can lead to errors, misinterpretations that can undermine your work later. Always protect confidentiality. Only share the report or any parts of it with those who genuinely need to know. Limiting distribution protects the privacy of all participants and upholds the integrity of the process. Act promptly on recommendations. Once the report is actually completed, it's crucial to move from findings to implementation. Assign clear ownership to each stage and each recommendation. Set deadlines and track the progress throughout those deadlines. This step shows accountability. It helps prevent similar issues from reoccurring. And always maintain proper records. Keep investigation materials and reports securely stored in accordance with your organization's record retention policy. Proper documentation ensures that the information is available if the process or the decision is ever questioned and reviewed at a later time. Finally, think beyond the immediate case. Think ahead in what might come. Ask what lessons the organization can learn, whether it's improving communication, updating policies, enhancing training, or addressing gaps in culture. Every investigation offers an opportunity to strengthen the workplace and reduce conflicts long-term. So after the investigation, it's important to actually execute those action items and make sure that it's not over just when the report is written. The next phase is just as important. Outcomes must be communicated and actioned on appropriately to ensure fairness, reinforce trust, and communicate everlasting change. Start by implementing corrective actions that address specific findings. This might include coaching, disciplinary measures, mediations, or adjustments to policies and procedures. So now that we've gone through the 4 steps, we're going to do a little knowledge check. So there will be a poll that's going to pop up on your screen. And what I'm going to ask is that you select the answer that you think is correct. So what are the 4 simple investigation steps we discussed? Is it A, analyze, intake, gather, conclude? Is it B, intake, gather, analyze, conclude? Or is it C, intake, gather, conclude, analyze? Leave it up for a minute and then we'll take it up on the next slide. All right, the suspense is over. The correct answer is B. So intake, gather, analyze, and conclude. This order creates a clear roadmap to ensure procedural fairness, timeliness, and defensibility. Now that you understand these 4 steps, you can approach every investigation with clarity and control. I will now pass it back to Menes to discuss some ways to prevent retaliation.
Thanks, Jordan. So now that we know the 4 investigation steps, it's important to discuss retaliation and ways to prevent it from happening. What is retaliation, or in some cases, as it's known, reprisal? Workplace retaliation is any adverse action that is taken against an employee for engaging in legally protected activities, such as reporting harassment, discrimination, safety violations, or participating in an investigation. Preventing retaliation after a workplace investigation requires proactive steps to protect all the parties involved. Some ways to prevent this is to take appropriate action, to have a policy that outlines the importance of reporting in good faith, maintaining confidentiality to the best of your abilities, conducting thorough and impartial investigations, and monitoring post-investigation as well. In Ontario workplaces, some common legal pitfalls in handling employee conflict or investigations include failing to meet statutory duties under the Occupational Health and Safety Act and under the Ontario Human Rights Code, such as not promptly investigating harassment or discrimination complaints, delaying investigations or the responses, biased investigators that could undermine the procedural fairness of the investigation, inadequate documentation, poor records of interviews, evidence, or outcomes. These weaken defenses in tribunals, where the balance of probabilities standards demands thorough proof, inadequate communication, and ignoring interim or follow-up measures. I will now pass it on to Jordan, who will give us some key takeaways and best practices to use in an investigation process.
Perfect. So now that we've walked through the investigation process, let's pull it all together with some key takeaways for successful workplace investigations. Successful workplace investigations require more than simply following a step-by-step process. They depend on quality, consistency, and fairness of how each stage is handled. The foundation rests on 5 core principles: timeliness, confidentiality, neutrality, organization, and proactive planning. Now, some best practices for employers. Most effective organizations don't wait for problems to surface. They focus on preventing them proactively. A proactive approach creates stability, reduces conflict, and builds trust across teams. Preparation is key. Before an investigation ever begins, make sure you have the right systems, policies, and people in place so when issues do arise, being organized allows you to act quickly. There are several practical steps to support proactive prevention. Review and update your policies regularly. Make sure they're clear and current, and they set out the expectations and give employees confidence in your process. Provide ongoing training for leaders, managers, and employees so everyone understands their responsibilities, reporting options, and workplace expectations. Encouraging early reporting, make it safe and easy for employees to bring their concerns to you and know that it will be handled with confidence. Intervene early, address issues as soon as they arise. Prompt action can prevent small misunderstandings from turning into major conflicts. Finally, remember that seeking external help, such as an independent investigator or an advisor, is best practice and not a sign of failure. It shows your commitment to fairness, objectivity, and due diligence. By focusing on preparation and prevention, you can make employee conflicts and investigations manageable rather than overwhelming. So just being mindful of time here as we wrap up today's session that focused on employee conflict and investigations. We truly appreciate your participation today and hope you found it valuable. We want to take this time now to remind you that you're not on your own. If today's webinar sparked any unanswered questions or situations you may be facing in your workplace, we are here to support you. Simply scan the QR code on your screen to get connected with one of our experts at Pivotal, and that way we can set up a time that works for you to answer any of those unanswered questions. So I'll leave it up for a minute or two just to make sure everyone has time to scan it. All right, so hopefully everyone had a chance to scan the QR code and book their free session. I know we all love free things, so yes, that session is free. If you have any questions or need any help, you can always reach out to one of us, and we're more than happy to help you. On behalf of the entire Pivotal team, thank you again for joining us today. This session has been recorded and will be shared with participants to review at a later time if needed. Thank you so much, and we look forward to supporting you and your businesses. Take care and bye for now.